Welcome to the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Trish.
And this is our podcast. We talk about wrestling news and various topics from different promotions, primarily AEW, but also New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, and topics from around the wrestling world. Whatever we tend to find interesting, and we hope you will too. So without further ado, we're going to kick it off. We are recording today on October 15th, 2023. And our first topic of the night is going to be the Tuesday Night Wars, or the Wednesday Night Wars Part 2, which is NXT versus AEW, and their competing episodes on October 10th, 2023, and what each promotion did to ante up with the other one, I guess is how I would describe it. So the Dynamite show was moved to Tuesdays because of MLB, Major League Baseball playoffs on TBS on Wednesday night. So this had been in the works for a while, was on the schedule, and WWE announced that John Cena would be on the show along with Cody Rhodes. And so this turned into a giant back and forth where WWE announced that NXT would have 30 minutes commercial free. AEW announced that they would do a 10-minute overrun, which they rarely do. NXT does an overrun pretty much every week. AEW announced that they would do 30 minutes commercial free. AEW loaded up their card with matches, some big time matches. We had Danielson versus Swerve Strickland. We had Hangman versus Jay White. We had originally Rey Fenix versus Jon Moxley for the International Championship. Later that was changed to Orange Cassidy after Jon Moxley wasn't cleared. We had Shida versus Saraya for the Women's Championship. Each one kept one-upping each other. There was some intense tweeting from Tony Khan. The Undertaker eventually showed up. It just got sort of spectacularly ridiculous as the week went on. And ultimately, the end result was that NXT did beat AEW Dynamite in both total viewers and the demo. The demo breakdown was 0.26 for Dynamite with a 0.30 for NXT. And NXT beat in total viewers by about 300,000, I think was the final. AEW's audience was pretty young. Like, it was statistically significantly more younger than they have been. So in some ways it was a good show for them. But I think there's a larger picture here in terms of what AEW chose to focus on for this Dynamite and how they chose to differentiate themselves from WWE, which I think both Trish and I find interesting given some of the previous criticisms of AEW's angles and promos lately. So let's get into it. Trish, this was a lot for something that will ultimately not matter.
And that's the thing, right? So how many people actually remembered before this week that this happened last year? Like, practically nobody.
Nobody.
They couldn't tell you what was on the show. They couldn't tell you what the result was. They didn't remember a thing. But all of a sudden, this was the biggest thing in the world because both companies treated it like the biggest thing in the world.
The Undertaker!
Well, the thing is, before the show, so yeah, WWE, they announced John Cena, they announced Cody Rhodes, they announced Oscar for a match, they announced Paul Heyman, and then what they didn't say, and they teased The Undertaker, they did like the bell toll on the end of the advert. They didn't announce LA Knight, that was one of them. And what they didn't announce, which we'll get to when we have a kind of a brief look at the minute by minutes, is they didn't announce their world title match. And I think that was kind of a clever strategy, because last time around, they didn't actually have a world title match, and yet AEW did. They ran the first meeting of Jon Moxley and Adam Page. So AEW didn't go in with a world title match either. And we've seen, traditionally, the world title is the one title that can still draw ratings in AEW. Yes. And they also went in without Kenny Omega, who has been the biggest single match draw all year. So it's kind of a strange one, because you can't say that AEW threw everything at it, but you probably can say that WWE did with NXT.
I think that's a fair take. I think there was definitely some cards that AEW left on the table. Yeah, and and the other thing is they came in from different from kind of different points this year. So you think about last year, NXT did a 0.18 and AEW did a 0.26. But AEW was doing in the low 0.3s coming in. NXT was doing in the low 0.1s. This time around, NXT last week beat AEW in viewership. Yes, they're not on the same night, but it achieved a higher level. And in the demo, it's only been about kind of 0.04 or 5 points off. And sometimes even closer with the additions of the Becky Lynch,
Dominic Mysterio, Seth Rollins into that equation. So they're not coming from as far away this time. And last year, they, in terms of people say, oh, they loaded it up. But actually, the main event of last year was a promo of Kevin Owens, Bron Breakker, and Austin Theory. And this year, they had John Cena and Paul Heyman surrounding that and an overrun with The Undertaker. So it's a completely different level of star power. And, the other thing, I keep hearing, AEW always kind of beat NXT when in these situations. And, it's really strange because when you look at last year as well, it was a lot closer than people think. So you are going to lose kind of 10 to 20% by moving to a different day. And we seem to just eradicate that as a thought process. But also, what happened was, so last year, yes, they were moved for baseball as well, but they actually had a lead-in from the baseball.
Yes.
So the first quarter last year had 1.052 million viewers for AEW. It's huge.
That's enormous.
They had this huge lead-in the demo and especially in viewership. And that was, quite crucial, because if you take that out, you go from a gap, say, in viewership of 752,000 to 675,000 to 707,000 to 667. So it's smaller as that gap. And you keep hold of that lead-in. Some of that lead-in may have stayed for 2 quarters. So I just don't think it's as comparable as people think it is. Because the conditions are different. And the kind of what led into the program is so different that saying, they did it last year, why didn't they beat it this year? I just don't think it's as simple as that.
It's weird because I can honestly tell you my first impulse was, hey, that's a good rating for both companies, right? Like NXT on its regular night, they went above what they normally do by significantly, and they should have. They threw everybody and their brother at this show. I mean, they didn't have Roman Reigns on, but The Undertaker and Cena, I think you could argue Cena is probably a bigger draw than Roman Reigns in some ways.
Sure. Definitely a bigger draw.
Yeah. But AEW, again, on a totally different night, they had the benefit of the commercial-free first hour, but they also, like you said, didn't have a strong lead-in. And I think one of the things that's unspoken, and this is a bit of a tangent, but the lack of a strong lead-in as Big Bang Theory has reduced in total viewers is, I think, a fascinating impact on the overall viewingship of Dynamite too. But again, tangent for another time. So I just thought this was a positive for both. I can't really say that I looked at this and thought anybody won or lost. It was just kind of it was weird, and I think one of the things that I was concerned about was how many big storylines and matches and what are they burning for this one night in terms of long-term planning and not hot-shotting. And I think with some of the outcomes of some of the matches, and some storylines were pushed, but the other thing I think that was important was, I know there was one report, and I can't remember who reported it, but the comment was that the WWE person says, we open with and what AEW opened with are not even going to be in the same league. And AEW opened with Danielson versus Swerve, straight to the match, and NXT opened with a Cody Rhodes promo on announcing the Dusty Classic. So that to me was, kind of embodies the two companies, or it should embody the two companies. And I think this was something that when the chips were down and AEW was like, we're going up against NXT, how are we going to compete? They loaded up that show with wrestling. I think there was one non-wrestling angle and a couple of short pre-tapes. But other than that, it was a wrestling show top to bottom.
Yeah, and this has been an AEW, we've all kind of spoken about as kind of struggled a little bit for its identity. And it's kind of amusing, maybe, that when it comes up against kind of big competition, the first thing it does is run back more towards its original identity with wrestling.
Right.
With shorter, maybe one in-ring promo in the episode and then small backstage segments, but most of the stories being told in-ring. So I did find that was interesting. Some of the things that kind of stood out for me with that is that NXT maybe did go absolutely heavy on those big names. But it made me think back to the 2021 where Rampage went up against WWE.
Yep.
And, everyone there was a huge deal out of it. AEW was really hot at the time. They didn't run a big card and they managed to beat, a Becky, Roman and Brock half hour. And that was the show moving. So that had come off Fox onto FS1, and it was seen as this huge victory. But what made me look at, so I did a bit of minute by minute analysis looking at the numbers that Wade Keller put out yesterday. And when I thought back about that, something that appeared to me straight away was how many people that WWE had on this show who were basically the definition of hot, right?
Yep.
So in 2021, WWE had a lot of focused acts, but maybe no one that was actually felt hot. And on this show, they had Dominic Mysterio, who comes out in the 11th minute into the Cody promo, and they set up not a title versus title, but the North American champion challenging the NXT champion right in the middle of the show. The other man in that equation, Ilya Dragunov, is a hot champion right now. His matches draw, he has critical acclaim, he's a great wrestler. And then you have LA Knight into that situation as well. Again, he's hot, he draws ratings, he's selling merch, he's selling tickets. And they this is probably the noticeable thing that felt to me. So this is probably where WWE was slightly ahead in that. So if you look at AEW right now, there are a lot of focused people. Could you say anyone is hot right now?
I don't know.
Yeah, so I think the closest maybe is like Swerve Strickland.
Yeah.
Because, he's in a feud with Adam Page, it's fresh, it's attractive to younger viewers, especially in 1834, and then I thought about this show, and the first thing that happens in the show, he has a great match with Bryan Danielson, but he's also beat relatively clean, and he's in a match that's apparently isn't important enough to be for a bigger belt. It's for a shot at a open challenge belt, and that's probably the one thing. So as much as there was a lot of WWE main roster beating NXT talent, there was for me a difference in a way, I guess, between the emphasis on the talent that are hot in WWE at the moment and talent in AEW who are focused on but maybe not. And that's probably the only big thing for me was, yes, we got to see developments with Hobbs, with Hangman and Swerve, with Jay White, with Shida. But in terms of Hangman, Jay, and Swerve, I don't know if any of them came out of this show better than when they went in. What do you think?
I don't disagree with you on that. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about last night's Collision later on in the show. And I think some of the stuff with the Dynamite, with the TNT belt ties into that. So I don't want to go too far down that road because I think you and I are both going to have some emphatic feelings about that particular booking angle. But I thought it was interesting to me that, like you said, they went back to their old school good wrestling program, but they also went to kind of a mix of old faces and new faces, right? We had Swerve versus Danielson, which you could argue is an old face versus a new face. We had Wardlow in a squash match, somebody they're trying to push again. We had Hobbs versus Jericho. We had Jay White versus Hangman. We had OC versus Phoenix, which, again, kind of outside the realm of that. We had Shida versus Saraya. I suspect that Darby's injuries kept him out of the Adam Copeland, Christian Cage segment. But I expect otherwise he would have been there. But I thought that was kind of, AEW doing that thing it does best, which is try to mix and match its, faces that are going to be familiar to a wrestling TV audience with people that aren't going to be familiar with a wrestling TV audience. And that was kind of interesting to me. But I don't know. There was definitely some stuff on that show where it was last week's Dynamite was great. I really enjoyed it. I think it was one of the better Dynamites they've had. I think it was probably the best Dynamite since Grand Slam in my mind. Just wrestling, some good angles, but from a long-term booking perspective, I feel like I'm starting to see some cracks in some of the tight focus booking that they've had since All Out. And that is causing me to be a little bit concerned. I did appreciate the responses to the picture-in-picture. I thought that having Tony Storm do silent movies was genius. It fits perfectly with what her gimmick is right now. It's a thing that, they always want to keep your attention on the screen while not blowing your picture-in-picture for wrestling, which is something they've been doing a lot more lately. We talked about that last time. And the Don Callis note cards was also great, So I would have liked to see Takeshita in a match, but yeah.
So the trick with that was, normally they would take full ad breaks during the episode. But in this episode, they actually didn't take one full ad break. So
Yeah.
instead of a full ad break, they did 2 minutes of picture-in-picture and then 1 minute of full ad break. And that was the 2 Tony Storm segments and the Don Callis segment. I'm not sure it made a huge amount of difference, but it was a good way of getting trying to keep people's eyes on the screen rather than going across. And it does show how much support they kind of had from the network in this. Which
Yeah,
is
the
good
network-
as well. It's good to see.
The network seemed to be all in on it. I mean, it was clear that AEW asked for the first half-hour commercial-free, pretty much in response to what NXT was doing, and TBS was like, "Sure, you want a 15-minute overrun? We'll give you a 15-minute overrun." Like, that was, in terms of a level of confidence from the network, that seemed to be a good sign.
Sure. And I think the other thing I did like, it sounds like I don't want to go 2 hours so quickly, but I felt like, and this is on both, so I had, I watched the NXT thing to look through the minutes as well, and the way they did have, both of them had stories flowing throughout the show. So whether it had been, the Swerve, Danielson, Christian thing, all the way through to the main event, and then Swerve and Hangman going through into the Jay White Hangman match, and then into the main event as well, and the afterwards, the smoz after, or even, the Mac stuff, going from the promo and then going into the promos later and the Roddy and Cole stuff. So there was this kind of fluency throughout the show. And NXT was similar, they built up the Carmella Hayes, Bron Breakker thing all the way through. You had the opening promo with Cody and then joined by Dragunov and then by Judgment Day to build up that title match in the middle, which is really where they caught AEW out big time on that.
Yeah.
So that was, we'll have a look at the minutes in a second. But yeah, I did feel that stories did flow throughout the show. Whether they hit all the points you want going forward for booking is a different argument. But at least there was that kind of fluency.
Well, and those are the most successful Dynamites, in my opinion, is when the show goes, there's like a through line story, there's stuff happening that's a callback, and Dynamite, did a good job. That even with the MJF stuff where, MJF, the Cole segment earlier, we don't have cell phone service here, which leads to MJF calling, which goes back to the Bang Bang Gang saying, you don't have any friends, which leads to the Acclaimed, going, hey, we could team up with you. Like that kind of connection where, I think there was a long time where AEW seemed to have its factions exist totally in silos, and now they sort of avoid that. And sometimes it gets a little gratuitous. We'll talk about Collision in a little bit, but there's other times where I'm like, yes, these people all work together. They're on a show together. They would interact with each other. It makes sense, and I always enjoy that a lot when I'm watching Dynamite. That's something I appreciate.
See, the funny things, we'll go through the funny things in a minute by minute. So I've seen a lot of reaction to the quarters. And the thing about quarter hours is it doesn't always kind of tell the story. So you've seen a lot of reaction saying the only quarter on the AEW episode that beat NXT in the demo was quarter number 3. Contained Chris Jericho and Powerhouse Hobbs, and then most of Phoenix and Orange Cassidy. And people go, why did Gallus lose so many viewers? But the key thing is, I always go on about count the ad breaks. Someone said to me,
Yep.
I should have a catchphrase. Well, that's my catchphrase. Count the ad breaks.
Yeah.
For the love of God. Because it drives me crazy. So they go 30 minutes commercial free. NXT actually don't. They go 29 minutes in and they go to an ad break. And they don't. What AEW choose to do is they choose to go, ad free for the next quarter as well, into quarter 3. And the reason I think they did this is because last year they actually caught them out quite well. So I don't know how much you remember from the show last year, but the quarter 4 last year had no ad break for AEW. And it was the MJF William Regal quarter. So it's quite an iconic promo when people think back to it. So that quarter, no ad break, NXT took 2 ad breaks. Huge difference between the 2 shows. Following quarter, AEW paid for it. They had 2 ad breaks. And as we'll talk about, NXT at the top of the hour have an advantage regardless. And they lost, it's to 23%, and it was Dalton Castle and Chris Jericho. You might remember that Chris Jericho just got blamed for it, as he does. Well, this time around, Chris Jericho's in the quarter where NXT take an ad break, and he doesn't. And the high point, consequently, of that pretty much since quite early on in the show. So the very start of the Swerve Strickland Bryan Danielson match was the middle of that ad break. So this is how much it affects. So we only really got viewership here. But when you look at NXT, they go from at the start of that kind of match, they go from just over 1 million viewers at the very start of that match, they go to picture-in-picture, and they basically lose 200,000.
Yep.
And some of them find their way to AEW. Not all of them, but some of them. Then they come back, and people are saying, oh, that match did really poorly, but actually, they grew from that 804,000 all the way up to 898,000. So there's growth there, but you don't see it. You don't see the minutes. So therefore, you just think that match is done poorly. And this is why you've got to be really careful with quarter hours. But the funniest thing for me was, so AEW then go into our break straight after Orange Cassidy's victory over Rey Fenix, which is 691,000. It's actually a high point of that last 20 minutes. I watched this because I had to watch it twice because I found it hilarious. So Toni Storm introduces her picture-in-picture. And then there is about 20 seconds after NXT come back from a full ad break that the actual picture-in-picture starts. At that exact moment, by the second, WWE bring out John Cena. Literally by the second. It's hilarious. There's about 20 seconds of dead air where the commentators are just kind of filling time and they're spotting on the crowd. They're not even running down the card. And it's nearly enough silence and it's bang. There's John Cena. And it's hilarious. But it's not something... Look, AEW have stars. They have people that draw good ratings. They do not have a John Cena.
No.
It's okay. You have to acknowledge that. They do not have a John Cena. It's fine. And John Cena comes... they come out of ad break and they come out at 721,000. And within 2 minutes, they're at 926,000. Nobody else can do that. It doesn't exist.
No.
It just doesn't. And that is something that putting somebody out there is just going to guarantee you. And that's what you're fighting against. And that gets up and over 1 million by the 53rd minute of the hour. And then they can, basically, because of John Cena and his impact, they can do 2 full ad breaks in that corner and get them out of the way. Doesn't matter. No one has one. And you kind of feel for it. So the thing with what AEW did was they tried to get ahead with the third, but then they knew they'd have to do 2 breaks in the fourth quarter hour, and they'd have to do 1 in the fifth. And this is not something AEW traditionally do. So actually what they normally do is do very few breaks in the first 5 quarters, and then they normally put 5 breaks. So they backload the episode without breaks. And it's because people that watch AEW tend to watch between 60 and 75 minutes of the show, and they don't tend to come in that late. So younger age groups might join slightly later. 18 to 34, for example, can be quite fluent and can grow throughout the show, but the older age groups tend to be 60 to 75 minutes. So they think that's where their advantage is. So normally the idea is you want to maintain as much of that through quarter 4 and quarter 5. So in general, there will be maximum of 2, but most of the time only 1 ad break during them periods. This time there was 3.
Yeah.
So it's a huge difference. So look, when you do that thing with Chris Jericho, you're going to get the boost with the Powerhouse Hub match. Somebody else has to take that fall, and this time, it was Paige and Jay White.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what happens. So what happens with Paige and Jay White is they literally start the match. 2 minutes later, they're in that break. They come back for 4 minutes, where the show grows from 554,000 at the start of the hour to 604,000, and then they're back in that break. There's no way of them to compete with that. And then NXT got them. So the difference with this match and the main event is it had stakes, right?
Right.
So you've got this Hangman Jay White match, no stakes.
Right.
You've got the TNT match at the start, a TNT challenge match at the start, kind of half stakes. The main event is no stakes with Adam Copeland. It is a debut, but it's Adam Copeland Luchasaurus, predictable outcome.
Yeah.
NXT do a world title match against the North American champion right in the middle of the show. And then at the end, they make it a number 1 contenders match. So they caught them out by adding stakes. And it's funny because the best moments in that kind of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for Dynamite came when they had stakes. So Shida and Saraya had the highest minute of the second hour, 714,000 for Shida's victory. So that was a huge thing. So that's probably where they caught them out, was with stakes. And then to be honest, there's nothing really. They kind of match up picture-in-picture and ad breaks all the way through. And then there's kind of nothing that stands out until you get to the overrun. And this is again, so AEW took an ad break a minute into the overrun. and WWE straight away, here comes The Undertaker. And bang, right? So they go from 873,000 all the way up to 1.017 million. And then at the same time, they're in picture, so they go from, for Copeland versus Luchasaurus, they go from 580,000 and they drop to 491,000. So for that minute, they're actually half of the NXT viewership. And then they don't really recover until NXT goes off the air, where they go from 604,000 all the way up to 732,000 for the end with the Smoz. So it's all a game. It's all a game. It doesn't mean anything in the long term, but you can see how people played their part and how, at the start it was probably quite even, but by the end, kind of, they'd actually been a little bit outfoxed for winning the night. If that's what's important to you, winning the night, they got done by having an extra world title match that they didn't see coming.
Yep.
And not, you can argue, there's probably an argument of why was there not a world title match on that show? They know that's their biggest tool, but, it is what it is.
But this is, I think if you want to say that, my question to you comes from WWE's aggression towards AEW, and I think it's embodied in this matchup, right? Because they did this last year, and they certainly did not go balls to the wall like they did this year. Not at all, right? So if all of a sudden WWE is like, oh, we're going for it. We're bringing Cena, we're bringing The Undertaker. And I know you have a bunch of, people on Twitter who will assure you that this is just because they're trying to get the best rights renewal deal possible. I think you and I are both grown-ups and understand that that's not all of it.
Sure.
So if that's not the case, then what's going on here, right? Why did WWE suddenly in October of 2023 decide that now they're going to get really aggressive?
I feel like it's a combination of factors, really, in terms of where, how aggressive they're becoming. So some of it's personal pride. So Triple H is more in a position of power now.
Yep.
Whereas Nick Khan was not so interested in kind of the battle, or openly as interested. But he is someone that lost power, that lost position. And, if it wasn't for what's happened with Vince McMahon and, TakeOver, might not be in the same position. So maybe some of that, and, wrestlers aren't exactly known to not want to scorn people that they feel have crossed them, whether crossing them is actually what's happened or not. So I think there's a bit of that. But there's a combination of things going on here now. So, if you look at some of their other actions, so they took Dragon Lee, and there was lots of talk about them taking Dragon Lee compared to what would happen with him in WWE compared to what would happen in Bandito in AEW. They've managed to move him through and up onto the main roster. They're pursuing free agents again. And they're also lowballing their own roster. So it's a twofold strategy. So they make acquisitions like Jade Cargill, and they, make, you shouldn't say, they make approaches. Like the Elite and Roosh knew what was being offered to them.
Correct.
Let's be honest, right? So they push up their value for Tony Khan, so it costs him more to retain them.
Yep.
And then they do this thing where they lowball their own roster, so there are people out there who are not getting offers, and the idea is that you let some of your older talent go that you don't think is making a huge difference to you, to fill up that roster, to then make other people uncomfortable, to be able to pick off the younger talent. There's also, they've been doing other things as well. You've got a media strategy. So straight after that rating came out, there was an article in Variety.
Yep.
So it's all about perception. They add NXT pay-per-views, or PLEs, to hurt Collision, that they previously tried to use to hurt the pay-per-views but wasn't as successful, but it does hurt Collision. And that means you have 2 Saturdays a month now going up against the WWE pay-per-view. And then they've got this live event thing going on at the moment where I think this is, I don't know how they can't challenge this on a competition basis, but they are signing agreements to arenas that you cannot sell tickets to AEW shows until the WWE show has been finished.
Yes, we saw that with the Ontario show in California. I think there was another show recently that happened with.
Yeah, Memphis, and it's happened in Hartford as well.
Yep.
But that avoids, so if you remember the Long Island debut where they were on sale at the same time, and the WWE show was before the AEW one, and the AEW one ended up outselling the WWE one. So it tries to avoid that situation. But what it also does is makes a really small window for AEW to sell tickets. So it puts pressure on that ticket numbers, and they know that it's harder for them to generate that. And they're also following them around the country. So Survivor Series in Chicago, they know that week is the week that Tony Khan traditionally runs Chicago. They just put the Kia Forum for a holiday tour event in December, and that's all holiday show. They've not run the Kia Forum in years. They run the Staples Center or whatever we call it. Is it Crypto Arena?
Oh, the cryptocurrency arena. Yes.
Yeah, that's the one, right? They
Yes.
run that arena. They don't run the Kia Forum. But AEW have now started running the Kia Forum, and all of a sudden there's a show there. Just so happens there's an AEW pay-per-view there in a month's time. And we've seen it, the last few weeks they've been following them around California, around Kansas City. And the idea is that it kind of, they use more aggressive pricing, more kind of press in them areas. And the whole point is to, make that workload for the AEW Live team department, who are already struggling, it feels like, with that workload. Under or even more pressure. It means they have to get it right first time, because people are looking at the numbers constantly now and assessing them. And while they're doing that, they're not paying any attention to WWE. So no, there's no focus on the poor SmackDown deal, which takes them off linear television onto cable. There's no focus on the fact it didn't deliver 1.5 to 1.7% as Nick Khan had promised the market, and it delivered 1.4 and hurt the share price. That SmackDown is now pretty much a lame duck show until that takes over. There's no focus on Vince McMahon and the comments made by Ari Emanuel this week, and how he's kind of gone missing. He wasn't involved at all in the kind of the Jade signing. And, there's also no comment on the ratings in terms of, look, they are still incredibly strong and they are still doing better than cable. But Raw has moved in quarter three into negative like-for-like for viewership for the first time this year, and is now only 2% up on the demo, whereas previous quarters were kind of 13 and 19%. So there are things that it kind of, if they keep that pressure on AEW and they keep that negativity towards AEW in terms of the press and the media, it kind of allows them to hide things as well.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things, there's definitely also some early signs of some softening in the markets. You talked about that Kansas City show, I think was the one. There's a house show where they added Roman Reigns because they were not selling tickets. It's kind of interesting. Again, I'm not trying to overstate this. WWE are still in an incredibly strong position right now, and I'm certainly not trying to say they're start of their downswing or start of a downswing. But there are some signs of softening in that in the markets, and I think there's also some interesting stuff going on backstage. The stuff you talked about with Ari Emanuel making comments about, their stock price took a hit because Vince McMahon. So usually, as I understand it, usually when you do a merger like this, the people who have the most stock sign agreements that they will not sell for 3 to 5 years so that it doesn't potentially cause risks for the stock price. Vince McMahon, because he is 78 years old, did not want to sign a 5-year agreement that he wasn't going to sell his stock. And so Ari Emanuel saying that is the reason why part of the reason why the stock price dipped, trying to take the blame and put it on Vince, which is fascinating because it kind of, shows some chinks in the armor there in terms of the Ari Emanuel Vince McMahon alliance. And plus there were some recent stories put out about how Triple H is the chosen guy from TKO, that Endeavor loves Triple H, and he's 99% of the creative is Triple H, which I also think is very interesting. But yeah, there's a lot going on there, and I think you're right that there's a lot of focus on what AEW is not doing right, and I think sometimes it misses how they're, to put it crudely, how they're being fucked with.
And that's the thing when you see the Tony Khan tweets, right? And I do think there's a differentiation between kind of in the run-up and maybe after, and the big thing is you've got to keep it from getting to TV. That was the Bischoff thing, and
Right.
98 of going from, doing the promo behind the scenes of I'm going to offer him out to a fight to literally going in the ring and saying, Vince McMahon, come and fight me. Or it's a very funny thing to watch. Or in 2010 doing the same, getting your guitar out and playing, on TNA against Monday Night Raw. But you can't let it get to that stage.
Right.
But on Twitter, does it really matter? But it also, the ones after kind of indicated the kind of how much impact that's had on Tony Khan, I think. how much they're kind of messing about and all these underhanded tactics. And you got to remember, the original fracture in AEW, in terms of with the booking team, with the Elite and Tony Khan, came from the pressure being put on with loading NXT with main roster people in
Right.
December of 2019. So this has been going on for literally since they started. But this year, I think the last few months definitely feel more aggressive than the year previous.
And, we talked a little bit about Tony Khan, the tweets, and I enjoyed them. Twitter is not real life. And in the lead up to the show, I just think that kind of stuff is hilarious. And especially, in a historical context, Tony Khan retweeting a gif of a bald asshole from Curb Your Enthusiasm is wonderful.
That went over everybody's head.
Nobody got that. I just thought it was the kind of thing where I was just like, this is a sort of stupid, fun stuff around wrestling and around AEW that I used to really enjoy. And it got lost with a lot of backstage drama and ticket sale, all that stuff. And so for me, the lead up to it and Tony Khan being like, we're going to do this, that was great. That's fun. The stuff afterwards, I agree. It sort of took a slightly darker tone that you were like, Tony, are you okay?
Yeah. I think it created more excitement for the show.
Yeah.
And more anticipation. I think it probably did help the rating. I really do. Because there was more people focused on what was actually going on that show than there has been in a very long time.
Right, you were like, again, you want the focus to be on the on-screen product. And that has been one of AEW's biggest issues for the last year or so, is that focus hasn't been on the screen product. And, that is why I enjoyed some of those tweets. Let's remember, what we're here for. And that's because we're excited to watch Dynamite. We're excited about the matches. We've got a wrestling-focused, heavy show. This is going to be great. And it was a great show. So, I don't know. I find this whole, anytime anyone says the words undignified around Tony Khan's tweeting, I just start rolling my eyes because, again, come on. And this whole thing of he needs to stop tweeting and focus on his booking. I'm like, we all tweet. You could tweet from anywhere. I tweet at work all the time. It's yeah. Anyway, so kind of I think that's essentially the big takeaway from Tuesday night was kind of, how AEW responded, what WWE was sort of doing to mess with them, and, where we ended up, which is that, again, next year, very few people will remember exactly what the rating was. There will be a handful. I suspect you will know exactly what the demo was.
Some of us are sad enough to know them.
It's true. Do you have any further thoughts on this whole back and forth between these two companies on Tuesday?
Do you know what the worrying part is, and the thing I'm not looking forward to? It's happening again in 3 weeks. So there is the Collision the night before Full Gear.
Oh, that's right, the Friday night show.
Which will go Friday night, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m, right opposite SmackDown. And obviously SmackDown has the most ridiculous advantages, being on network, being in their regular time slot, having, their big stars. So I don't expect much, but I'm sure the discourse will be fantastic.
I do think this is kind of interesting because, I think it leads us into our next topic. But I think, to start with, I do think there's a little less pressure because I think there's this sense that Dynamite, it went 74-3 now. It beat NXT so consistently for so long that there's expectation that it should always beat NXT. Where I think with SmackDown, most people understand that a Friday night show on Fox is not going to beat something on, TNT regardless. But I, quite frankly, after watching last night's Collision, feel like they could use the benefit of a show where it's like, hey, we got to pull out all the stops. So this was not something so this is our next topic, folks, is last night's Collision. We didn't originally have this on our schedule to talk about today, but I sent Trish a message this morning and was like, we have to talk about Collision. Collision was terrible. I looked at the card in advance and I was not overly enthused, but there are certainly times where I look at a card for a show and I think I'm not going to enjoy this, and then I have a great time. the show last night was just so weird, right? So you have the big advertised match, which is Christian Cage versus Bryan Danielson for the TNT belt, which is the coming off of the Wednesday night show where Danielson beat Swerve for the opportunity to have a TNT title, which, as Trish pointed out, is an open title belts. You don't need to have there's no rankings for this anymore. Like, what's going on with that? So on top of that, then you had the feud was complicated with a 15-minute opening promo, in which to me felt like, and I know there's been a lot of discussion lately about what AEW does and when it veers into WWE stuff. And this to me felt like WWE stuff. Here is a 15-minute opening promo where everyone except Bryan Danielson had their full entrance music. You had Adam Copeland coming out to start. You had him interrupted by Christian Cage. Fine. That made sense to me. That's part of the storyline. I'm fine with that. If you want to inject Adam Copeland into the match between Christian and Danielson, great. But then you had Ricky Starks coming out, which made no sense to me. Then you had, and Big Bill, by the way, sorry. And then you had Danielson coming out, okay. And then you had FTR coming out, which again made no sense to me. And this was just, so, okay, we have this 15-minute promo, we have a giant talking session, and then we move into the matches, of which I think 2 were announced. Samoa Joe versus Willie Mack was announced, and Commander versus Brian Cage. And Commander versus Brian Cage was a late pull. I think they didn't even announce until the show had started that the match was not happening. Tony Khan tweeted about it. So the matches we ended up with on top of that were Kyle Fletcher, who was against one of the Boulders. I can't remember which one. We had a Keith Lee squash match. I don't even think he had a named opponent. We had Samoa Joe versus Willie Mack, and we had Juice Lee versus Christopher Daniels. We also had Chris Statlander versus Sky Blue, and that's kind of like an ongoing story. So none of these matches are particularly interesting to me, and I understand that like there's a storyline component to each one of these, right? You're building Samoa Joe probably for the title eliminator tournament that's going to end up at Full Gear. You're building Juice for MJF. You're building Fletcher for Omega. That came out last night. That's going to be a thing on Dynamite. They're trying to give Keith Lee something to do, and I'm normally fine with matches for matches' sake. I know there are folks that are like every match has to have a story, and there are other folks that are like no match ever needs a story, but we ended up with like no baby faces here. It was all heel opponents being built up. And that to me was just kind of like, what the heck is going on? Like, we had a Miro promo where we had CJ with Action Andretti, and I liked her pitching herself as a manager. Like, I thought that was kind of cool. Like, I like the idea of a new manager showing up and being like, you should sign with me. Great. But then we had Miro killing Action Andretti like backstage, and I'm like, could we have any element of this story in the ring? Like any element of this story? When was the last time Miro had a match? I feel like it was Wrestle Dream. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, it's before then. He didn't wrestle on Wrestle Dream. I think it was All Out.
Good Lord. So, and I think we want to go back to touch on the opening promo, but like, from my perspective, this was not a show that I was like, I struggled to get through this show. Like, I struggled to watch the whole thing. I turned it off at one point last night. I started it up again this morning. Like, there were definitely points where I was like, oh, Jesus, God. Like, and again, the Christian versus Bryan Danielson match was fantastic. Fantastic. But the ending was garbage. And so you just, and I feel like this is where I get frustrated, right? Because I've listened to people talk, like there was a big fight between Brian Alvarez and Dave Meltzer about Swerve versus Hangman and who should have won and whether the loss is bad. So you have Swerve go up against Danielson, you have him lose to Danielson. Again, I'm not totally opposed to this in a vacuum, just so that Bryan Danielson can lose to Christian Cage via fuckery. Like, why? Why?
So,
why?
If you remember when the Swerve Danielson thing got announced with the shot at TNT title and Hangman Jay got announced, I was probably the only person who should have been really happy that went, what the fuck are you doing?
You did.
I went nuts. And it's not that I could see it coming, it's just, here's the thing we were talking about earlier about WWE being hot with certain people, right? And the way they do that is you keep people's momentum. Right. But no one here had the momentum care. So you had Swerve coming out of a match with Hangman, which before the match at Wrestle Dream they were promoting as basically a number one contenders match.
Yes.
They literally said, whoever wins should be the next guy for Max, right?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, and I know they changed the plan slightly, but it doesn't matter. It's what story did you tell on screen? So you then told the story on screen that the number one contender would be for the TNT title and Open Championship belt. And that all of a sudden is what Hangman's spot is worth. It's not worth a main event push. It's not worth a title match for the main title. It's not even worth a title match for one of the secondary titles. It's worth a number one contenders match for a secondary title. Like,
why?
You are...
My other thing is, why do you need to inject Bryan Danielson into a very good Christian Cage Adam Copeland story, right? You don't need to put Bryan Danielson in this. Like let them do their own thing. It's a good angle. They're handling it well. They've got Nick Wayne. They've got Darby. They've got Luchasaurus. Like, it's not solely old ex-WWE guys. Like, let this play out by itself. Keep Danielson doing other shit.
And in effect, maybe you didn't even need him in the Adam Page Swerve story. But this is what you do. So then all of a sudden, what you've done is, and then you have him go over Swerve relatively clean, right? So you're saying that you're on a level where you can beat Adam Page, but not Bryan Danielson. And these, ironically enough, are two guys with very similar ratings records in AEW.
Right.
And actually, you could potentially argue that Page has a stronger ticket record. I think I definitely could have, the data that I keep. So it doesn't make sense to me in that way. So in a way, you've devalued Swerve straight away, and you've stopped his momentum. You've devalued Adam Page. And then you get to the match with Hangman and Jay White, which isn't for a stakes, isn't for a number one contendership. He's not playing for that. And you have Jay go over relatively weakly. Cheap finish, has to grab the tights as well as the Nana. So you are not building him up as a strong contender for the world title either. So you've not given them any momentum. And then on top of that, this is Bryan Danielson's first loss since beating Okada. Singles loss? Yeah. So you don't give that to somebody to help elevate them. You give that to Christian Cage, even if it's not clean.
He doesn't need it. He doesn't need it.
And then, okay, so you're going to do this thing with Ricky? You're going to go back to that again? So does that mean you're going to have Ricky and Big Belt lose the tag belts before then? Because they are transitional. But, who is being elevated from this? And what you said? You said, it was a great match. It was a good match until the finish. And that is the WWE saying. It has been for the last 10 years. It's 50-50 booking, and it was a great match until the finish. And this is what they didn't do at the beginning, and they're doing at the moment that's worrying us. So there are lots of bright spots. There are things that you like. There are programs. There are people you like to see come back and fresh. But the problem is people aren't on TV consistently. They're not on TV enough. They're not wrestling enough. And when they do, they have their momentum stop too much. And until that changes, they are not going to get anybody to break through this ceiling. We have the Jericho program, the Moxie program, the Max program, the Danielson program, sometimes the Omega program, depending how we feel. We aren't getting these other guys leading programs and being that because we're not getting in a position to, because they don't have that momentum. And if you keep doing this, they never will have that momentum.
No, it was just so frustrating to me because I was like, again, the Christian Cage, Adam Copeland story, interesting, fascinating. My assumption going into last night was that Danielson would win the TNT belt because you don't need it for that story. Like, fine, you want to give Danielson a win. And then I'm like, wait a minute, he's lost? Like, and why you're injecting Ricky Starks into this? Like, this is infuriating to me. And don't even get me started on FTR, right? FTR, like, we didn't talk about this.
Can you sell anything?
Oh my God. What? You lost the belts last week in a 4-minute squash where you sold the fact that Cash can't do anything. Couldn't get in the ring, got destroyed on the outside on a table. Absolute destruction. You made Big Bill look like an absolute monster. Just so that they can come out in the first segment this week and say, well, we're hurting, but everybody else is hurting too, so we're just going to come on out here in our big boy pants and do our best. What the hell is this? You can't sell this beating for 1 week. You have to get in the ring with Adam Copeland. Like, this is the stuff with FTR that makes me absolutely freaking insane. Like, I don't understand why. And this is why when people on Twitter say, I would like to have a conversation about the tag belt situation and how bad it's gone since FTR took the belts. Yeah, we should have that conversation because it's and I'd love to hear and again, I'm getting very heated here and it's wrestling. But this is the kind of stuff where I'm like you said, I've been really enthusiastic and positive. I felt like since All Out, their booking has been so much tighter. They seem to have they've been focused on the next show, right? They were focused on All Out. They were focused on Wrestle Dream. They were focused on Grand Slam. And now we've sort of lost it in a group of people milling around the ring for no apparent reason, just so that we can play everybody's entrance music and everybody can get a big pop. And, I understand, for whatever reason, that FTR felt they needed to lose the belts, whether it's because there's something going on that they need time off, whether it's because they genuinely wanted to put Ricky Starks over, whether in the meanest interpretation possible, they're ducking the Young Bucks and they don't want to give their win back. That to me is like, take a week off, guys. It's okay. You could just not be on television for a week. Same with Ricky Starks. Do a pre-tape, do a promo, have a match with you and Big Bill against somebody else. Unless there's an injury I'm not aware of, which, fine. But, we talked about this, and I said to you, you and I had an argument where, not an argument, because you and I don't fight.
Doesn't sound like it right now.
We had a debate where I talked about the fact that I don't mind seeing some story elements happen outside of the ring. I'm fine with that. And you said that you felt that one of AEW's strengths when it started was that the storytelling was in the ring. And now I feel like, when it comes to some of this stuff on Collision especially, it's all happening outside of the ring. And all the stuff that happened last night, again, I get that a lot of these things, like I talked about, are storyline built. There's Kyle Fletcher has a reason to have a match with Kenny Omega. You want to build him up and make him look strong, so he beats a boulder, great. But at the end of the day, why do I care about these programs? I care about them because of the baby faces involved. And yet I never see or hear from any of the baby faces ever. It's all the heels over and over and over again. And I'm just like, why? Who am I rooting for and why?
It only works if the baby faces come over in the end, and that's not happening. So you're getting heel victories. And then that makes life more difficult. Let me ask you a question. So you mentioned that we don't see the baby faces, and I think this is particularly an issue on Collision at the moment. So, we saw Jay White yesterday. We didn't see MJF. Nope. We saw, Kyle Fletcher challenging Kenny Omega, but we haven't seen Kenny Omega. Okay? And, we saw... And this has been consistent, so it's not just like that. This was happening with Jay White having to cut promos on... having to cut promos on the Elite before All In. Yeah. And it just feels... So there was a quote from Wade Keller this week, and he talked about, there are still people that... There's a trust issue still. And we discussed this, I think, last time, but there's still a trust issue between Tony and some of his talent. And sure. Is it being reflected by how few people are still working Collision now?
I imagine that, part of it also, let's be realistic, right? You had some outside the box things happening. You had Julia and Lee Johnson got married this weekend. It's New York Comic-Con this weekend. We had a lot of AEW talent were doing New York Comic-Con. I'm sure they were reimbursed, nicely for that. That was probably something people lined up ahead of time. Those are big money-making opportunities. So, conventions. That was a big issue when Collision started, was the number of independent shows and, convention bookings that you're going to have guys miss out on because they're doing a Saturday night show instead. I know there was even a thing this week where, and that I was surprised about, Daddy Magic was supposed to do Toy Hio, which is a big convention comic signing thing. And he pulled out at the last minute. And he pulled out at the last minute for what? A backstage interview where, the remnants of the Jericho Appreciation Society, which is the best I can come up with for a faction name, approached the Acclaimed for a match. You can't pre-tape that?
Jericho Appreciation Society are just like the new version of Just Four Guys, which were like Suzuki-gun, but without the name. And so I think of them as they're just four guys with Anna Jay, and it's
just four guys and Anna Jay.
Yeah, that's essentially what I do. But no, it's so there is an element of that, and there's an element of the balance of that. But what it does feel like is sometimes it's difficult to gain momentum. So at the moment, it feels like the only ongoing story that's crossing the two is anything that Danielson's doing, anything that Christian and Adam Copeland are doing.
I will interrupt and say the Bang Bang Gang jump back and forth between two shows.
Yes, and Jay White and the Bang Bang. Yes, absolutely. But that's it, and you're only getting kind of half of those programs. So it's great that we now have continuation between the two programs, and that's much better than where we were. But I still don't feel like we're gaining too much from this at this point. I don't know.
Collision last night felt like a rampage to me. Like, if you're saying that we're going to make this an A show, that we're not going to have this thing where we have a couple of shitty weeks of ratings, like a .08, and we're not going to load the show with stars, right? And don't get me wrong, like, Danielson is a star, and you know, Christian is a star, and Cope is a star, but, like, where are the... Like, for me last night watching it, I was like, where's the party match, right? The party match is a staple of AEW programming. You've got some kind of absolutely crazed multi-man, whether it's a tag or a trios, where a bunch of people are going crazy and you're just having a damn good time. You don't see that on Collision. Like, I think we've maybe had a couple, but, like, last night could have absolutely used it. And it just wasn't, it wasn't fun. It was a slog. Okay. And even though there was good wrestling, it was still a slog to watch.
And the thing is, you know, when I think about other companies and you think about what CMLL do, and one of their keys to recovery is they know what they are. They know what they are, and they found a way to be better at it. And that's a key, you know, and you can talk about, people talk about Mystico, you know, coming back as, well, the original Mystico coming back into that role and being well used as a bit of a, you know, the Mexican superhero, defeats everyone, but always has a goal. He always has something to aim at. There's always something to come and watch him for. And you can talk about their kind of, they're building a young talent with, you know, Atlantis Jr., and the new version of Dorada coming through and being pushed heavily and how that's changed things. And even kind of the program between Rocky Romero and Volador. But one of the key things is they know what they are. They're not confused about it. They're not trying to be something else. They're not trying to find that balance. They literally go, this is what we do, and this is how we can do it better. And maybe that is something that AEW can look for, is, you know, look at your original incarnation, look at what made you different, and think about that and how you can make that better, rather than trying to imitate what others do.
I think that's a part of it. Honestly, at this point, I would like to see, like, striving for the belts would be a nice touch at this point, right? Like, we've seen this with a few things, right? You saw Darby want the TNT title. You saw Orange Cassidy want the international title. You saw Moxley want the international title. We don't really see anybody want the tag titles. We don't really see anybody want the trios titles. It's a lot of random one-off squash matches or semi-squash matches. And, like, I would like to see, not even like a program, but like set somebody up who's going for the tag belts or who's going for the trios belts and who's out there every week winning and then saying, we want our shot, and they get a shot. Like, that would go such a long way with some of these things to me in terms of, like, bring it back, focus on the ring, bring it back, focus on the chase, right? Like, I love the Acclaimed, but what are they doing right now? Like, I was so excited. I'm like, okay, great. We got the trios belts off of House of Black. Like, they didn't do much with them. So now we've got the trios belts on Acclaimed, and they're not doing anything with them. Like, you know,
they're just they're supporting role now for MJF. That's their role now.
Right, which again, I'm fine with. I feel like that's, you know, I'm not going to say I'm not going to enjoy that, but at the same time, it's not really what I want to see the trios champions doing. You know, like it's just a frustration for me because it just seems like. It just seems like there's two steps forwards, one step back sometimes, and I'm probably being overly harsh in some ways.
No, but you know, it's because we still care about it that you kind of can feel them sort of emotions towards it. But this goes all the way up to the world title, so you know, if the thing is. It sounds like I'm praising WWE too much today. God, I'm gonna have to balance that out soon. But no, but. The one thing that they've done well, so the reason why their business has done well to their audience is that everybody has chased that world title. So if they've had a hot baby face from when they did the run with Kevin Owens, they go into Sami Zayn, they go into Cody Rhodes, they go into Jey Uso, they go into LA Knight now, we're now going back to Cody Rhodes. I'm sure I've probably missed a couple there. The whole aim is the world title. They all go up to the world title. And yes, they didn't capitalise on any of them yet. And that's probably slowed their business down since SummerSlam, slightly.
Yes.
But the point was they all wanted it and they all got to that match. So you have momentum, and the baby faces are what carry the tickets. They will often carry the ratings, and that's what we saw. So because of that, they had that continuous growth because everybody has chased the main title, and that's what's important. And, you know, you're right. There's been too much in AEW where we're chasing other things, you know. And it was really kind of weird to have on Wednesday's broadcast, you know, you're having Swerve and Danielson having a match for the TNT title where Swerve isn't really that interested in the TNT title. He's literally been on TV saying, I want to be the first black American AEW World Champion.
Yeah.
He's not
He
saying
didn't-
I want to be the first
he didn't-
TNT World
yeah,
Champion.
no.
And then on the same show, you've got Samoa Joe saying I want another match after I lost clean to the World Championship.
Yes.
That is the sort of continuity and momentum. And this is where momentum, people think it's just wins and losses, but it's about
No.
perception, it's about presentation, it's about time on screen, but it's also about where your journey is going and making that story clear to people.
I think so.
Deep breath.
Deep breaths. I think before we move on to our next topic, the main thing I want to say is I don't think I would have been as disappointed or frustrated by last night's Collision had I not enjoyed Dynamite so much and not felt like so much of Dynamite on Wednesday was good that I was kind of like, why? And, real life happens, stuff goes on, I get that, but it was definitely, there were multiple baffling choices to me. And the babyface thing was definitely a piece of that. So, all right. So one of the things you did talk about that we wanted to touch on, I think we have two sort of briefer items than we usually do big, long, meaty topics, but I think these we have sort of slightly more like a touch on topic is CMLL, because we had advertised for next week the announcement that Mystico is going to be facing Rocky Romero on Rampage, which is going to get filmed on Wednesday night in the suburbs of Houston, not Houston itself, which is where AEW is taping. And this is a big sea change because AEW has traditionally worked with AAA. They've had AAA belts featured on their show, AAA champions, pretty much since the beginning of AEW. I think one of the first tag matches before there were AEW tag belts was the Young Bucks and the Lucha Brothers for the AAA tag belts. And CMLL and AAA have a contentious relations. So, it's going to be interesting to see if AEW can thread the needle between working with AAA and CMLL simultaneously.
Yeah, so, CMLL are the oldest wrestling company in the world. That's their self-proclaimed title. And the thing with AAA is, so for anyone that doesn't know the history of AAA is kind of similar to Noah in a way, that they were a break-off of CMLL. It's a former booker, Antonio Pena, that took them away for a network that wanted more American-style wrestling. And in the mid-90s. And CMLL didn't want to change. They had their format, as we've just discussed, and they wanted to keep to it. And he was frustrated by this. So he takes, Psychosis, Rey Mysterio Jr., Conan, that sort of talent, and he breaks off. And they managed to basically overtake CMLL quite quickly. Until kind of 94, they have the pay-per-view with WCW, the World, When Worlds Collide. God, you can tell it's like they have When Worlds Collide, and then their business changes. But there is so much bad blood between them, and so much kind of mistrust that there is no real working together, and it affects other relationships. So until very recently, CMLL have their relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling, and that meant, when we came to Forbidden Door, none of the AAA talent or AAA affiliated talent, so even someone like Rey Fenix, who is now not contracted with AAA, isn't used in general on them shows with New Japan talent. But there has been a little bit of kind of a detente in terms of AEW. So you remember last year the Will Ospreay Trios match where they wrestled Jessica Dragon Lee and Roosh, was it?
Yes.
Roosh? Was it Roosh? Maybe
no, I
not.
think it was Andrade.
Was Andrade? Okay. But that's going to escape me. But they wrestled a trio. So you had New Japan talent wrestling AAA talent, essentially. And that was a real breaker. Because in general, if you're a American talent, Canadian talent, and you work for AEW and you wrestle in AAA, you are fine to wrestle in New Japan. There tends to be an issue with that. It tends to be Mexican talent there's an issue with. So the idea that this working relationship with AAA has been fractured quite a lot, and then it was said to have been fixed when Kenny Omega went over and wrestled Vikingo in the summer. And you have Vikingo wrestling very regularly now in AEW. But you also have guys that have recently left AEW, left AAA, so Bandito, Roosh says he's not going to work there currently. Phoenix is no longer contracted. So it's kind of a tetchy situation we don't really know much of. But CMLL are much stronger as a business now. They're the ones doing multiple sellouts coming out, this year. huge programs. Mystico has an absolute case for Wrestler of the Year in terms of biggest box office draw, actually, as well. Which will go under the
CMLL,
radar.
they've had a huge turnaround, not just creatively, but like financially. Like they're drawing huge, they're getting critical acclaim for their
Sure.
shows. Like it's been a big turnaround this year.
And they have so much exciting younger talent. Whereas, AAA have the older talent in general that aren't kind of, and they're doing lots of kind of mismatch matches and things don't always make sense coming into Triple Manias. They don't finish the feuds that they've been telling on TV all year and local shows. So it's much more frustrating. So I can see the appeal of wanting to work with CMLL now. The fact that they've been able to do so and it not affect the kind of relationship with AAA is pretty much a breakthrough. And the likelihood, look, you're probably not going to see, a Mystico or a Titan or anyone like that wrestling, perhaps like a Phoenix or anyone affiliated still with AAA, but you are going to be able to have them on the same programming. And if you're able to do that, that's probably one of the biggest breakthroughs in a very long time. And sorry Jay, but there's only really one catalyst in this world right now. And if you think about Rocky Romero, former tag team specialist in Ring of Honor all them years ago, if you told me in the mid-2000s that this guy would be the center of wrestling and connecting companies, God, we would have laughed. But this guy is the guy that got them back in contact between AEW and New Japan when Kenny Omega suggested the Kenta thing. He's the one that got Kenny Omega back to Japan. He's the kind of one of the guys essential to the start of Forbidden Door, and he's now, and he connects so many independents with different companies, with New Japan, with CMLL. He's out there wrestling, he had an incredible feud with Volador down there this year that did great business, and he's really good. The matches are fantastic. So this guy is the catalyst. He's probably one of the most important people in wrestling, and we never talk about him.
No, it's like sort of an understated, like, oh, that's Trent's old tag team partner. Like people sort of don't seem to appreciate, like, how integral Rocky Romero is to, so much of the alliances that AEW's had with different companies and that New Japan has had with different companies. It's kind of fascinating to watch, and I'm glad he's getting the opportunity to. He did a voiceover they did a package last night on Collision to sort of introduce CMLL and Mystico to the AEW audience. Which was kind of weird because Rocky talked about himself in the third person. He was doing the voiceover and he's like, and there's a new person who's been traumatizing CMLL. It's Rocky Romero. And I'm like, that's you. It's going to be a great match. I'm really excited. I feel like one of the things AEW has done really well this past year has focused a little bit more on luchadors, has brought more luchadors into the promotion, has given them opportunities on television. That's something that I think, again, separates them from WWE, who, obviously they have Dragon Lee now. They're trying a little bit with that, but I think AEW has a strong head start there.
And there's a business reason for that as well. So, they've identified that the Latino market is one of the biggest markets now in TV, especially as other viewerships are dropping. So there are every reason to follow that market and to get more luchadors to the show. But it also makes the shows, you talked about the missing party match last night.
Yep.
Luchadors are great at that. And it was the same thing when they were in WCW. They kind of infuse that energy and they make that show feel different. And it's it's something you can use to differentiate yourselves. So I think that's very important too. So I think it's great. It's great that he's in this market, because they're going up against the Texas Rangers Houston Astros game.
Yes.
So what competition do you not want when you go to Texas in the middle of that's pretty much
baseball.
it. Yes. And he's a huge draw in Mexico. He is the biggest draw in Mexico right now. How that translates into, a large Latino market like Houston, we're going to find out. But I think it's an exciting turn, and it's just kind of something different, something we need to it'd be good to see how it works out.
Yeah. It was one of those things that if you knew what was going on, to see that press release or to see that tweet was like, oh shit, like, this is great.
Yeah, when the CMLL press release went out, I was like just staring at it for ages.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So moving on from that to a slightly different but similar topic.
I was wondering how you were going to transition this one.
My transition. In terms of, exciting embraces of new people coming in, we have rejection. We had an interesting story that dropped on the 6th of October, which was that CM Punk was in talks with WWE to return. This came originally from, I don't remember who had it originally. Was it Dave Meltzer that had it? It very quickly got confirmed by Nick Houseman, who I think we all know to trust. If he says something is happening from the Punk perspective, then it's happening from the Punk perspective at this point. And then there was a lot of discussion about, obviously, Punk's going to come in at Summer's Survivor Series, which is in Chicago in November, and this is, going to be a huge death blow. There were several people who were very upset about what this would mean for AEW, and it was kind of fascinating to think about, because my perspective on this, and I think you and I were sort of in the same way, which was I didn't know that the WWE audience was going to be as excited to see CM Punk return as some folks thought, but I think if the last year plus has taught us anything, it's that people who love CM Punk will always overestimate his appeal amongst a broader fan base. But about 4 days later, on the 10th of October, the story was put out by, I think it was Fightful that released it first, and then House of Wrestling also confirmed it, and it was confirmed later that night by Dave Meltzer, that WWE said no. And I think the funniest part about that was the way that Dave Meltzer put it, which was, what's going on with CM Punk? As Brian Alvarez asked him, and Dave Meltzer said, WWE said no. He wanted to go there, and they don't want him, which I just found so funny.
Dave's bluntness at time is just it's very, very amusing.
They said no. He asked her to prom with a sign and music and flowers, and she said no. So WWE made it clear that they have not shut the door completely. There's always the possibility that if their ratings drop or something else happens, they may change their minds and decide to bring him in. But the subtext of what they talked about was Sean Ross Sapp, or Sean Ross Sapp said this, was that WWE did not want people to assume that he was showing up at Survivor Series, and he's not going to be there. And Houseman also said, yes, there were talks between WWE and CM Punk, but they've ended and he's not going there. So the other thing that I found fascinating about this was all of the outlets made it clear that this was a Nick Khan, Vince McMahon, Triple H joint decision. They all decided this. So it wasn't as though one person wanted him and the other people were saying no, or there was some kind of disagreement. It seemed pretty clear across the board that this ain't happening, which I was fascinated. I was very intrigued when they first said, oh, he's in talks, because I was shocked by that. I didn't think WWE would want him. So, did you think this realistically was an option?
I thought they might explore it. They might think about it. But the idea of doing so is you can establish 7 things. So if you say you're in talks, and I do believe there was communication.
Oh, yeah.
Everything I've been told, the people I speak to who are in tune with the Punk camp, even in everything you hear from people that are in tune with WWE say there was talks. I do believe that. And, it's very clear that it was Punk that reached out to them in September, not the other way around.
Yeah.
So this is all about leverage. And for the first time in a very long time, Punk doesn't hold the leverage. No. And ironically, the last 2 times he didn't hold the leverage was also with WWE. So they are coming from a much more position of power. So you think about in 2019, when he was doing the WWE backstage and thinking that would be a way back in, and Vince said no. And Vince said no then. Well, it didn't come from Triple H, it came from Vince. Vince said, no, we don't need you. And you think their business was a much more kind of, not troublesome point, but a much more challenging point than it is now. And then last year, so they get to December, Punk puts the idea of I want to buy out from AEW, and he puts the feelers out, do WWE want me? And they say no. And you can say, well, WWE probably knew he wasn't getting out his contract, but they still said no. Yeah. It still happened. And, and that's maybe different, because Vince wasn't supposed to be so much in charge, and maybe it's a Triple H decision. And Triple H is interesting because, this is the guy who we talked about earlier who doesn't like being scorned.
No.
Who CM Punk said, when the match proposal for WrestleMania 30 came down, well, you need to be in this match with me on WrestleMania, not me with you. It's just a blatant disrespect. So I don't think he's probably forgotten that. And as much as you can talk about being a businessman, this is Triple H. If anyone remembers Triple H in the mid-2000s and the Reign of Terror, ironically, as Max Snell talks about it, there really was a Reign of Terror. Go and read the Observers. It's insane. But this is not a man who is afraid of that sort of behaviour.
No.
And I don't believe he will leave all that behind. I just don't. I can't see it in me. It's not how people in wrestling generally are. So, but it's not just him that says no. So we've now had 2 occasions where Vince has said no as well.
Right.
And he was much more Vince's wrestler than he ever was Triple H's guy. On top of that, they've got people with genuine heat there with him. I think there's some obvious ones. You've obviously got some close friends with people in AEW. You've also got Seth Rollins. I think everybody knows that one. They all think it's an act with a thing. No, they have genuine heat. Yep. And, the key one, the other key ones is Roman Reigns.
Yes.
So you are talking significant power people, some with contracts coming up, and some who literally have more power than anybody else in the company. So we're not talking, you can't just walk all over them. You can't just go, and Triple H isn't probably going to do that, because one of the things that keeps them competitive with contracts with AEW is at the moment their work environment is seen as a good place.
Yes. People are a lot happier than they were a year plus ago.
Yeah, exactly. So, it means that people are less tempted to go to AEW, and it keeps their business strong. So that's the thing. It's one of them. What I found more interesting is there's kind of been a switch in the talk around Punk and AEW. So, right after Punk was gone, there was people still suggesting that there was still communication between Tony Khan and CM Punk, and now it's kind of, CM Punk's putting out stuff through Nick Houseman saying, I'm embarrassed by Tony Khan's tweets. And, and it seems to match at the same time period where you're seeing someone like Adam Page kind of come back to more kind of a central role. And it's just an interesting kind of, and Tony's now more obsessed with Adam Copeland and Bryan Danielson, and seems to have moved on from CM Punk. It's kind of like a lost lover, isn't it? But
a bad breakup.
It is, exactly. But I find that's kind of fascinating as well. And then the last thing I find really quite funny is, have WWE been testing CM Punk's drawing ability?
You brought this up, and I was like, God damn, she's smart. She's right about this.
I don't know if I'm smart on this or not, but it's funny. So they've been doing little lines and stuff. How were they seeing how much social media response they got? They had Nakamura do GTS last week. And don't tell me that has nothing to do with CM Punk, or it's just because they were going to bring Kenta in. I've heard the stories. Yeah. No. But the funny thing is, so we have a friend who went to the show.
Yes.
And who told us, so as much as it was replayed on the TV and on the ad break, so the TV audience saw it twice, it was actually done in a part of the arena where very, very few people in the arena saw it. So are they trying to test his drawing power? Or are they just trying to prove that he gets no reaction and they don't need him? It's all about leverage. This whole thing is about leverage. So if they ever do feel like they need him and they need him for one show and that, he's got no power here whatsoever. And he's definitely never going to have the power levels that he had in AEW.
No. I just, what he does next is I'm sort of fascinated by. And part of me, as someone who finds the CM Punk stuff endlessly fascinating, like the whole thing amazing. I kind of almost was like, hey, I'd love to see him in WWE because I can enjoy the mess while not being concerned about how it's impacting the TV that I'm actually watching every week. So, that's not very nice, but what can I tell you? I'm kind of fascinated. What is he doing next? I know there was some joke tweets about Impact and some, always going to show up at Independence. I don't see any of that happening. I think we're much more likely to find out which podcast network he's going to join.
God.
Rather than like an additional wrestling. My thought process has always been that if Punk didn't want to be a part of the independent scene or New Japan when it was at its absolute height, 2015 to say 2018, I can't see him wanting to do it now. So, who knows? We'll see what happens. I don't think we've heard or seen the last of him.
I don't think so either. Do you think he is motivated to go to WWE because he wants to continue wrestling, or do you think he's motivated to try and prove people in AEW wrong?
I think I don't think it's about wrestling. I think I think that when Punk came back in 21, he was enjoying the wrestling. I do think he was enjoying the programs. He was enjoying the wrestling. I don't think from the Collision run and the stuff that he's done since he came back in June of 23, it did not seem like that was interesting to him. It did not seem like he, was really into it. I mean, he had a show to book, and like nothing happened on that show. Like it's kind of uncharitable of me, but and that was one of the things I have a frustration with it. It sort of boils over a little bit with FTR. It's like we have all these amazing ideas. All you heard from Dax on his podcast was how he had all these amazing ideas for the Pinnacle, and they didn't do any of them. And he had all these amazing ideas, and he was pushed to the end. And it's like, okay, well, now you're tag champs. Now you're booking a show. What are your amazing ideas? And they are, we win all the belts, or we pretend we're leaving to go to WWE. Like, these are not like really interesting stories to me, and I don't think they're particularly innovative or groundbreaking. And I didn't think that anything Punk was doing on Collision was particularly innovative or groundbreaking. I understand that there's a style of quote unquote old school wrestling that some folks enjoyed and appreciated, and I get it. Like, we all like what we like, but I thought there was definitely a point where, like a month into it, Collision just devolved into a bunch of squashes and some tag matches, and that was about it. And I can't see CM Punk committing to it's such a fascinating situation to me, because it seemed like he had the world handed to him and he didn't want it. And so now it's like, well, I'm going to go back to WWE. Why? You had the opportunity to do all the things you said you wanted to do, and you didn't want to do them, and you kind of blew them up a little bit. And so now you're going to go to WWE for what? And the other thing that makes me crazy, and this is a bit of a side note, but this whole thing of the structure of WWE, CM Punk will thrive with the discipline and the structure of WWE. And that part always makes me nuts, because he's a 45-year-old man. He's been in wrestling for a very long time. He shouldn't need another grown-up to tell him how to behave.
Do people not remember that he couldn't handle the structure last time? There is such a funny thing of people just forget all his other history in numerous companies. But yeah, he'd be on the structure. Well, he probably wouldn't even be in it, because literally, if they're going to use him and try not to destroy everything, it's going to be minimal appearances. Right. He's going to be everything that he proclaimed he wasn't. So
it's definitely clear there was a cost-benefit analysis that was made, right? Like, and like you said, whether it was done with social media, whether it was done through some of these, are we getting a reaction for some of the hints we're dropping about him possibly coming in, whether that was disingenuous or not, right? There was a cost-benefit analysis. What are the backstage potential pitfalls of him coming in? I'm sure people made it clear that they wanted or didn't want him, and the evaluation is, listen, this isn't worth it to us. It's not going to be a benefit to us from our business perspective, and it's going to potentially cause bigger problems, and so we're not going to do it. Thanks a lot. We're not shutting the door forever, but we're going to take a pass right now, right? Which... Mm-hmm. Good for them. Good for them. You don't need this guy. I don't know.
As somebody said, it's just not worth the headaches.
No, he's their problem now. One day Trish will have to do our 7-hour CM Punk retrospective.
No.
But I feel like we've talked too much about this topic.
Do I not get followed enough on this? That one's for another day.
It'll be your version of the death of WCW.
I've been listening to that book recently, and it's scaring me half to death.
Oh, God.
But it's very funny, because I do recommend if you do listen to the audio version, because the Brian Alvarez on the on Wall is exactly the same in this book, and it's fantastic. So.
All right. So I think for our last topic tonight, we are going to jump into the pool on the issue du jour, which... obviously a more serious one, and it's the MJF promo, folks. So if you don't want to hear anybody listening to this, and I don't think we're going to take a huge amount of time on it, if you don't want to listen to any more about this, please feel free to turn it off. That's why we saved it for the very end. This was something that I sort of shied a little bit away. Trish was like, we should talk about this. And I was like, I don't know. Do I have to have a take? I'm a firm believer in not having a take if I don't feel like I have a good one. And part of me felt like I wasn't sure there was anything I could say better than what Trevor Dame said in his tweet thread about the topic on Wednesday night, which I recommend everybody should follow. Everybody in wrestling should follow Trevor Dame. But I'm going to let you kick this one off, Trish, because I'm not really sure
Okay. So we should probably put as a reminder that it looks like they've dropped the angle.
Yes, yes.
So they rang the promo with Juice Robinson and MJF on Wednesday night, and then last night in Collision, the coins and the quarters, they've suddenly become a ring. So Jay White gave him a ring. So there looks like there has been a reaction, and the reaction has been to drop the angle.
Yes.
And, you know, I think this is one that maybe not we might not even agree on. This is something that, you know, we've had many discussions in group chats this week where there were some real severe disagreements, and there will be, because this is a real nuanced subject, and
Yes.
and this is something where it's okay. It's okay if we disagree. It's okay if we have different viewpoints, but it's just important that we acknowledge each other's viewpoints.
Yes.
And so what I'll do is I'll tell you what, when it happened, straight away my thing was, what on earth are you doing? And the reason I had concerns on this is not just the traditional because of the subject type, but because of things that kind of aren't in their control. So when you do a story or something like this in a film, and you have an actor playing a character. So, you know, for example, Steve Coogan at the moment is playing Jimmy Savile. He's a well-known ex-DJ, child abuser in the UK. He is playing that role. He is highlighting and educating on how that happened and how it was allowed to happen to stop it from happening again. But he's not Jimmy Savile. And he's not going to be Jimmy Savile in 5 years. He's Steve Coogan. He's playing a role. So in wrestling, you don't have that. And especially not in AEW, where authenticity is probably more important than any other company in the world. You know, there is not a great line between the character and the actual person in AEW as there is anywhere else. And that creates more issues if you are going to do some of these stories. So yes, Juice Robinson has used quarters as a weapon in New Japan. He has brought that into AEW. It is part of his character. But you don't make it ambiguous when you write Friedman, which is not a name used in AEW for Max.
No.
We call him Maxwell, we call him Max, we call him MJF. You know, they don't call him Friedman. And you put emphasis on that. And then, so there was some wording as well. So you are blurring the lines on that Juice Robinson character. And can that character come back from that? Can you leave that character in after the program if you had continued with it? You know, it's really, really difficult to do because you are not in control of the reaction to this.
No.
So you may plan it out, you may plan the angle, you may think about the wording you're using, you may think you're being deliberately ambiguous, you're towing the line, but you don't control that reaction. So the people control that reaction. It's not in your control. And sometimes this is where wrestling gets really dangerous in some ways, is when you can't be in control of the situation. And, you know, you look at it, that crowd went deathly silent after that part of the promo. They didn't boo. They didn't cheer, like, loudly for Max afterwards. And Jay White wanted nothing to do with it. Literally nothing. He just went, here's my last line, guns up, I'm out. Didn't acknowledge it or anything. You know, because the thing is, it's like, you know, people say, oh, you know, they could sign up to do this. But sometimes you don't know exactly what the outcome's going to be. And, you know, you go along with a story idea. Some people have power in a situation, some people don't. So it's not always that simple. And, you know, we've seen things in the past, like Muhammad Hassan, that angle cost him his career. There was no coming back. It was done. It was over. And, you know, we've already seen, unfortunately, this weekend, you know, other members, so Juice Robinson isn't online, but we have seen other members of the BCG receive quite a lot of abuse based on this. So it was clear, you know, that wasn't in their control. And the thing about authentic characters is, where it's difficult, this whole thing was difficult, is that Max's character has used language with racial undertones before, with Takeshita.
Yep.
And also, you know, other things close to line with the kind of methany stuff with Brian Pillman, and come out as on top in them feuds. So you're saying, oh, yeah, it's the good guy is going over, so it's okay. But that has not happened with the same character, not the same man, but the same, you know, we think about character in the past.
Right.
So he's been able to use language in similar situations, not in terms of his faith, but in terms of racial connotations, but then came out the victor. So it's really difficult to look at that character and that authenticity of it and be able to match this up in a program. it's difficult because I absolutely understand what he wants to do. And I applaud him for, wanting to bring these issues to the forefront. And the video that was it on Collision last night?
Yes.
Am I saying? Yes. That's great. That shows him, that really kind of has an impact on being educational, showing him as a leader, representing the company as well as himself and what he wants to bring forward. That is far more effective to me than running a storyline like this that's so open to interpretation and can go anywhere. So you're not in control of the fans. You're also not in control of the global climate. Okay?
Right.
And people say, yeah, well, there would have been a reaction to this at any time. And yes, absolutely, there probably would have been. However, this is the worst possible time that there can ever be. I don't think there can be a worse possible time. So we are seeing a conflict here that, is worse than what we've seen in generations. And it's leading to a lot of generalizations as well. So people don't we're seeing, and this is not just, an online thing or anything like that, but people don't always refer to Hamas. They talk about Palestinians. We've got a government in France who are banning pro-Palestinian protests. They're not banning pro-Hamas protests, it's pro-Palestinians. And it's the same, we're not talking about the Israeli government, they talk about Israelis. And you're also seeing it with faiths as well. So the danger is you can't be seen as being on one side or the other. And, and there's challenges to this. We're seeing other companies, even Football Association in the UK here have ended up in a huge row over not wanting to put lighting over Wembley with the Israeli colours. And it's challenged from both sides. So there is this huge debate at the moment, and whatever you do right now will be wrong. It will just be wrong. Whichever path you take will be wrong. And whatever you do forward will be microanalyzed for every single thing you do. And you've got to balance that thing of we're being educational, but we're also in some way being exploitative because we are using this for heel heat and we are using this for a match and for pay-per-view buys and TV ratings. So Where is the balance there? So it's really, really difficult. And we don't know where this conflict's going to go.
Right.
We don't. So you start something and it becomes really, really difficult. And do you have the tools in place to manage this? So for me, there is nothing in the last 18 months that tells me media-wise and relationship and how they communicate with their fans that they have the tools in place to deal with this. If something was to go even slightly wrong or be misinterpreted or be interpreted differently, because again, you can't control that in something like this, they do not have that tools in place. And we've seen examples this year that even haven't been massively discussed where they have butchered media relationships.
Yes.
So absolutely not. And they are the three major concerns. So you can't control the fan reaction, you can't control the world events, and I don't think you have any control over your own media response.
No. Well, and especially, and this is not, there are definitely, amongst legitimate criticism of AEW, there are always people looking to jump in to push an agenda, right? It's a small percentage, and I certainly am not, I'm not trying to say that anybody who doesn't like this is pushing an agenda, because that's far from the case. But there are bad actors out there that are like, well, AEW, I think there's a reason that article ended up on TMZ.
Absolutely. Well, you can kind of see, we've talked about, that sort of thing earlier, for sure.
Right. But I'm kind of with you on this one, and I think, in a more immediate individual perspective, I appreciate that there are people that are fine with this and are okay with seeing something like this. And I think I'm certainly I feel more generous towards it knowing that it's being driven by a wrestler rather than something imposed upon someone from above, right? I tend to feel more generous towards stories that individuals want to tell. And if this is something that MJF feels strongly about and wants to share, then I applaud him for that. Like you said, this is something clearly that's very important to him. And that gives me a little bit more confidence that it would be something that would be tackled better. But that said, it kind of becomes one of those situations where you say, is wrestling the medium for this? And a lot of people are like, wrestling is not the medium for this. And it's, well, will ever wrestling become a medium for something like this if it isn't, an envelope isn't pushed or somebody doesn't try to do it, right? But I think for me, at the end of the day, I keep coming back to Trevor Dame's tweet. There are people who will see something like this in wrestling and say, I don't want to see this. And their feelings are valid. And there are people that will see this and say, you know what, that's good. They should do more of that. I appreciate that as being something that's shown, and I think we have Jewish friends that have said they have no issue with the angle. Mm-hmm. But, we live in everyone's feelings are valid society, but sometimes that becomes difficult when people's feelings are extremely strong and in conflict, which is kind of what we're seeing, I think, with a lot of response to what's going on. Yeah. I do think the way that they have moved off of the angle is a smart one. I think what you were saying about where this puts Juice Robinson is fair. And I don't want to turn it into something that it's about Juice Robinson, because it isn't, but is it, like you said, Juice Robinson is going to continue to be in AEW, and it has essentially been acting like a live action Muppet.
He is essentially Animal. He is Animal. Yeah.
So do you want to have an anti-Semitic live action Muppet? I don't know that you do. And it just, it's not an easy topic. It's not a good topic.
And this is it. So it causes us to have this much anxiety to discuss it. And that feels like a good reason as to why not to do this right now.
Yeah.
If we can't even discuss it without having this kind of anxiety towards it, then, and we're not comfortable enough to do it, and then they have to build a pay-per-view off this.
Yeah.
I absolutely understand. I understand what they were going for. I understand why Max is so passionate about it, but I also understand why they've now kind of moved away from it. And and there's kind of lesser important aspects of this, but they're kind of still impactful from a wrestling perspective. And it feels like nothing in comparison to what we've just talked about. But, there was an impact of, you were essentially transferring the heat from this program onto Juice from Jay White.
Yes!
And, who was already without a clean major win. He didn't get a clean win over Hangman. And I think that will play back into story, as I talked about on Tunnel Talk.
Yes.
Very enthusiastically. But that he's already without that kind of development and that kind of forward motion, and you're only going to make that worse by having that as part of the deal. And the one thing that I think is going on with Max right now, and I think some of this is to do with all the criticism, and it's probably the first real time he's faced criticism in his reign. Maybe you could say before Double or Nothing, when the main events were flipped but in general, this is probably because of the difference then was the company was in a stronger position than it is now.
Yes.
So ticket sales, rates. So people are focusing on these other things. So obviously more focus comes on the champion, because that's the nature of being the champion. You are not only just, you don't just wear a belt because you want it. You were given that belt by the company so in order to represent it and also to carry it, as somebody said to me today. So the thing about it is because of the criticism that he's received, it feels like he's trying to do too much to me. So we had this potential angle. We already had in this angle a belt stealing angle. Yep. We have this. We're gonna still do some sort of side story of Juice Robinson. There is the thing teaming with the Acclaimed, but also his relationship with the Acclaimed. Then the stuff with Adam Cole. And as much as sometimes we talk about we want interlinking stories and everything like that, they're so different. And this one particularly would be so different from the other ones, which are mainly comedic. Even the Jay White thing is mainly comedic. That it felt too erratic a character movement to me.
It's MJF himself is a much more comedic character than I think people realize. And I think I understand why he's gone to a more comedic face character, why his instincts were to go to a comedic face character, right? He's an extremely broad heel character. So you'd think he'd be a very broad face character, right? That's, so I get kind of why he's trying to do what he's trying to do. And I think moving from Cole to Max Caster makes sense, right? On some level, if you want to try to recreate that lightning in a bottle, you probably have the biggest chance with Max Caster. But
sure.
I also feel like the continuation of the whole Adam Cole, Roddy Strong pre-tapes is starting to make no sense to me. if Cole is gone, then Cole is gone, and he's going to be gone for a while, right? I don't believe this is an angle. I don't believe it's a worked injury. I think he genuinely broke his ankle and is going to be out for a year. And if that's the case, then like, why are you doing pre-tapes? Like, is he coming back to be on TV while he's in recovery? Like, how does this help Cole and how does it help MJF? And I don't know that it does, right? I think moving on to not Juice Robinson, see, I'm doing it already. Moving on to Jay White is a much smarter choice for them and a better opponent for him in terms of like, let's set up some heels, let's build up some people. And I get it. Like, I appreciate him wanting to course correct, right? Mm-hmm. From my perspective, and a lot of the criticism is earned and valid, there's an edge to some of it that feels a little bit over the top, where it's like people finally have an opportunity to criticize MJF and they're really taking advantage of it. And, you know, it just, there's a point where I'm kind of like, all right, let's all just calm down, you know?
And there's difficulties for him as well. So people have to remember this is a first reign. First reigns are not easy. And all of a sudden you've gone from the guy on the way up that everyone supports and everybody wants to be there. And all of a sudden you've got to deal with the politics if everybody doesn't want you there because they all want your spot. You know, the same thing we saw with Adam Page last year. And there is also the element of his age. And this is the first time he's babyface, but he's not pure babyface.
No.
He's not this superhero babyface. He's a babyface carrying out heel leanings.
Yes.
It's all heel tendencies. And there's challenges to that. So there are massive challenges in terms of having strong opponents because it's really difficult to oppose somebody who's doing the same things that you are.
Right.
And sometimes it stops things from being simple. And this is the kind of thing with Max. So if you are going to be a babyface, then you need to have strong opponents in order for you to face adversity. Because if you just run over everybody vocally and then you beat them like you're Hulk Hogan, and you're not going to get people as excited to see that. You need that adversity. You know, you said it earlier, you know, the money's in the chase, right?
Yep.
So is there money in the way that he's being presented at the moment? So what I think's been made really clear is he's just going to beat Jay White, right?
Yeah.
They've made it clear that you've done the belt stealing story, he's going to beat Jay White. So there's no tension in this. There's no adversity. There's nothing that people feel like he can't overcome. So you either have that or you need to flip that. You know, you think about it. So Stone Cold in 98, 99, he had short title reigns and he spent most of the time chasing.
Right.
Because he then had something to chase. So I do wonder if Max would be better in that role now he's flipped. And the other thing is, you know, there comes a point in the title race, he's had the belt a year now.
Yeah.
And he's not new enough a year. So is that, you know, there comes a time where the stories in your title reign need to stop being about you and about the people chasing you.
Correct.
And that's where the money comes. And I don't think we're in that part right now. And they need to kind of look at, do we want Max to chase or do we want somebody to chase Max? But it can't just be about Max. There needs to be this thing where that transitions now. So then you build them people up. So then you get them things we talked about with WWE earlier, where you get these people chasing and they come to the top and they might not get there and they fall back down, but you've got that chase and you've got that momentum from that chase. You know, I just think it needs to be simpler. I think that's it with Max right now. I think, in a way, I actually think he needs to listen to things on the internet a bit less.
Yes. 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 If there's anybody who needs to stop looking at Twitter, it's not Tony Khan, it's MJF.
Yes.
Like, stop worrying about what other people are saying. Take some feedback that's valid. The stuff we heard this week about the quarters, like, you learned from it. We're not doing it. I think that's a smart choice. But, like, tell your story, kid. Like, tell your story. And I think people do need to kind of understand, and I think I'm always like, oh, cut him a break. But, you know, this is his first babyface turn in his entire career. That's not an easy thing to do, is to completely change alignments. And as Meltzer and Alvarez put it very succinctly, like right at the beginning of the babyface turn, he has to still be the asshole that everybody loves. Because people don't want to see MJF be a white meat babyface. They want to see him be an asshole babyface. And so that complicates his opponents. It complicates, you know, because he's already on top, so there's no chase there. So, like, the Samoa Joe thing was really successful because nothing MJF did could counter Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe was a force of nature, right? Like, MJF can't trick or play mind games or do anything with the force of nature. Samoa Joe is going to kill you, right?
There's your adversity. There's your
Exactly.
adversity.
Right. So that's the kind of thing that they need to lean into more. And I appreciate, look, I am confident that MJF is a student of the elite and is like, the fact that they tell long form storytellings, he's into it, right? I admire that that was something he wanted to do. I admire that that was something he wanted to try to get into and be more serious, because I do think he's taken some of the slapstick stuff to heart. And I don't care if there's comedy storylines in the belt, as you said, but everybody should be trying to get it. We have a whole top of the card of amazing wrestlers who don't seem to give a shit about the championship right now. And I'm kind of like, dudes, like the only one who's said anything about it recently is Samoa Joe.
And how much more threatening would it be to that belt if, like, he was having to face Kenny Omega? If he was having to face a Adam Page from Momentum? If he was having to face, you know, any of these guys that are up there, a Swerve Strickland on the way up, you know, who at the top of his heel power, there would be adversity and there would be things that people would pay to see in that development. But we're not at that place at the moment.
And I also think
it
it can tie into a larger story with MJF, right? That MJF's storyline has been, I don't have friends. I really want friends, but I don't know how to make friends. I'm going to pay people to be my friend. I'm going to get a bunch of flunkies to hang out with me. But the reality is, I don't know how to be a friend. Well, now I found one guy who seems to like me, and I enjoy spending time with him. And can I turn that into more friendship? Because I have always said this, AEW is a show about friendship, right? Everybody has friends. Everybody in AEW has friends. And this is what would be a much better thing to build the feud around. Like, this is what Jay and Juice should be pushing more to Max. You have no friends. Jay keeps bringing it up. You can't. We're gonna go 4-on-4. You can't even find somebody to be with you because Adam Cole's got his broken foot. Like, that's a better storytelling device than what he's got going on right now. It's less complicated. It's simpler. Like, let's just take it back to basics, okay?
Just keep it simple.
Yes, keep it simple. That's all we need. And like, that's the part where, like you said, get off the internet, buddy. We love you. You know, I am an MJF fan. Like, I think the guy is clearly trying his best. Like, it's not always easy, and he's, you know, struggling at times. Like, get off the internet. Like, it's okay. Not everybody's gonna like what you do.
And you can use the stuff you find on there. So, you know, we talk recently, we've talked about how Adam Page uses things, and although he's not on Twitter anymore, he uses things that he hears, like, and, you know, criticism of his character, and he builds that in. You know, we saw it with the Swerve promo on Hangman at the start. But he doesn't change his booking for it. He doesn't change his character for it. No. And, you know, this is the thing. So Max currently is kind of overreacting. And I think it's completely understandable. But, yeah, just, you know, be CMLL. You know, we'll go back to the very start. Be CMLL. Know what your brand is. Be simple. And just be better at it. Yeah. That's it.
And they're, again, Wednesday, they came close. You kind of were almost there. Don't fuck it up on Saturday.
Just consistency, momentum. Yeah, we repeat the same phrases, but it's just because you can see how close they are.
They're so close.
They're not far away. And, you know, they're kind of rebuilding back towards more of that original identity. So they're so close that you know that they can get there. And it's not, you know, it's not like going crazy over them. It's not, God, we are not doing The World is Dying. They're not getting a TV deal. I can't tolerate that anymore.
No.
But it's very much, they're so close. It's just a few tweaks.
It's just a few tweaks.
Things to be simpler. So yeah, BCMO. God, speak to Mystico. Get everyone his advice while he's over.
Please bring Rocky and Mystico into the room and have a whole conversation.
Yes. And move forward like that towards Full Gear, you know, which is a major drawing point in LA, in front of your network executives.
Yeah.
With, you know, some of your main guys coming back into prominent roles.
Yes.
So that should be your focus point, and then you go from there to the new TV deal, and you go from there, and you start bringing these people through, and we transition like that. But yeah, just get to LA in the best way possible, and put that foot forward. That's it. All right.
So it's so easy. Why wouldn't anybody? Come on, Trey. Like, please.
I know it's complicated, but sometimes it just needs that kind of regrounding, doesn't it? So
yeah.
All right.
I think that's a great place for us to stop this week.
Yeah, I feel like that's a great way, to bring this episode to a close. So this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. If you have any questions or feedback, you can contact us directly at trishandsarahpod@gmail.com, or on X or Twitter, or what are we naming? What's the name of this thing?
It'll be Twitter. It'll be Twitter. You'll pry me from Twitter from my cold dead hands. I'm not calling that thing X.
On Twitter, at Trish and Sarah. You can even now comment on us on the Wrestling Observer board in the radio shows section. We do have a thread, thanks to our friend DJ Convoy. So please comment there, any feedback as well. Our podcast is produced by Leah from Tunnel Talk, who puts out incredible content every Sunday on the stories and characters of All Elite Wrestling. And then on this particular week, they invited myself to join in on the fun, breaking down the episodes, so you can listen to that as
I enjoyed that very much, by the way, Trish. So it was, if you haven't, I definitely recommend, if you're interested in listening, it was a fun podcast to listen to.
There is I have a complete breakdown on Jay White and Hangman. So if you do love that lore, and I absolutely do, I am very much a professed New Japan nerd, then please listen to that, and we're happy to hear the feedback on that as well. Okay, so the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast will be back in a further 2 weeks, but until then, I have been Trish.
I have been Sarah.
And we thank you all for listening.